Have you ever had a moment that stopped you not because of what happened, but because of how perfectly it fit? You think of someone you haven't seen in years, and they call that day. You dream of a scarab, and the next morning, one lands on your window. You look at the clock, 11:11 again. It's in moments like these that the boundaries between inner and outer seem to blur, and something in us whispers, this can't be random. Carl Jung once wrote, "We are so captivated by the world's outward face that we forget the psyche also has a world of its own, and sometimes the two worlds meet." He called those meetings synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem to bridge mind and matter, symbol and event, soul and circumstance. But Jung didn't romanticize them as magic. He treated them as psychological revelations, mirrors held up by the unconscious to show us what we have not yet seen in ourselves. He said, the psyche seeks its own wholeness through events that reflect its inner state. That means when something in the outer world stirs you, it may not be because the universe is sending a message to you, but because the world is responding with you echoing what's already alive in your depths. Yet, in the world we live in now, with its infinite scroll of symbols, coincidences, and predictions, it's hard to know when meaning is genuine and when it's self-created. The line between revelation and projection has never been thinner. Every day we are flooded with patterns, repeating numbers, prophetic TikToks, messages from the universe, people announcing that their dream came true, that their breakup was destined, that the end is near. Jung foresaw this cultural moment. He warned that the gods have become diseases. What he meant was that when sacred meaning is denied by culture, it doesn't disappear. It breaks through in psychological symptoms, obsessions, and patterns of fear. When society no longer holds mystery through ritual or myth, the unconscious compensates by producing it through coincidence. So today, in the age of meaning overload, synchronicity has become both the symbol of our longing and the test of our discernment. Because we are not only surrounded by signs, we are starving for them. We want to know that our lives are guided, that chaos hides an intelligence, that our pain has purpose. And Jung understood this hunger deeply. Man cannot stand a meaningless life, he said. When meaning is lost, the soul falls ill. But here's the challenge he left us with. Not every coincidence is sacred. Not every pattern is revelation. The psyche projects as easily as it perceives. And in our attempt to find divine order, we can actually fall into illusion, mistaking the echo of our own mind for the voice of God. This is the tension Jung wrestled with until the end of his life. How can we open ourselves to the possibility that the world is speaking without losing the capacity to question who is speaking? That question is the heart of this film. So before we rush to decode signs and omens, let's step back and ask, why are we seeing so many patterns in the first place? Why does the modern mind, flooded with data and anxiety, suddenly feel haunted by meaning? To answer that, we have to begin with the psychological landscape of our time, a world Jung never saw but would have recognized instantly. We live in a world, Jung could only have imagined a world, where meaning multiplies faster than we can absorb it. Every second, billions of signals flash across screens, trending prophecies, algorithmic, angel numbers, dreams gone viral. The sacred has been digitized, the unconscious uploaded. Jung once said, the world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. Today, that thread vibrates under constant stimulation. Our minds are flooded with symbols before we even wake. Messages, coincidences, forecasts. The moment we open our phones, the collective unconscious speaks in pixels. But there's a paradox here. The more information we consume, the hungrier we become for something beyond information, for meaning that feels alive. The ancient hunger for revelation hasn't vanished. It's been reformatted. In Jungian terms, We are caught between the chaos of outer data and the order-seeking instinct of the inner psyche. Jung observed, when external order collapses, man turns inward for guidance. That's what's happening now. In a culture of instability, wars, climate crises, collapsing, trust the psyche compensates by hunting for order. Every coincidence becomes a potential message, every pattern a prophecy. This isn't new. It's the same instinct that once made our ancestors trace constellations in the stars or read omens in the flight of birds. The difference is scale. The modern psyche is bombarded by so many signals that our pattern-making function, what Jung called the archetypal drive for meaning, goes into overdrive. Psychologically, this can be both protective and perilous. Protective because pattern recognition is how consciousness survives chaos. Perilous because when every flicker of coincidence feels divine, discernment collapses into superstition. Jung warned that the more the outer world loses its gods, the more the inner world swarms with them. Our screens have become new temples filled with symbols, visions, and apocalyptic revelations, each promising certainty in an uncertain age. We scroll not for entertainment, but for orientation. We are, as Jung might say, pilgrims, wandering through a flood of images, seeking the lost center of the self. And yet, beneath all the noise, the same ancient question beats in the human heart. Is someone or something trying to speak to me? Jung believed the psyche doesn't invent this longing. It reveals it. The soul has its own logic, he wrote, and that logic seeks purpose in all that happens. When meaning dissolves in the collective, individuals begin to carry the burden of mystery alone. That's why coincidences strike so deeply now, because they restore, even briefly, the sense that the universe remembers us. But the danger is this: when meaning becomes too easy to find, it loses its gravity. 1,000 small signs can drown out the one that truly matters. And when everything becomes symbolic, nothing transforms us anymore. So before we can understand what a true synchronistic event is, we have to see this larger condition for what it is, a culture overwhelmed by its own search for meaning. And to make sense of how we got here, we have to return to the source, to the man who gave the modern world its vocabulary for meaningful coincidence. To understand synchronicity, we have to return to the early 20th century, to a man standing between two worlds, science and spirit. Carl Gustav Jung was not content with one language of truth. He moved like a bridge between psychology and mysticism, medicine and mythology, reason and revelation. It began, as many revelations do, with a question that refused to leave him. How can something inner, a thought, dream, or emotion, align so precisely with something outer in the world when there is no cause linking them? If two events coincide meaningfully but not causally, what law connects them? This question haunted Jung for decades. And in the 1930 seconds, he found an unlikely ally, the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, one of the founders of quantum mechanics. Pauli was a man tormented by dreams and coincidences that mirrored his research. Jung saw in him a living example of what he called the psychoid, a realm where mind and matter share a hidden order. Their collaboration became a modern alchemy, psychology, and physics meeting to explore what Jung called an acausal connecting principle. In their letters, Jung wrote, "Just as the psyche has its inner laws, so matter has its own order, and there are moments when the two orders interlock. That interlocking, that mysterious handshake between mind and world was what he named synchronicity. He defined it as the coincidence of inner and outer events that are meaningfully related, though not linked by cause and effect. In other words, synchronicity occurs when meaning, not mechanism, binds two realities together." Jung's most famous example came from his own analytic practice. He was working with a young woman whose intellect had become her defense. She dismissed the symbolic, the irrational, the mysterious. One day, she described a dream in which someone gave her a golden scarab, an ancient Egyptian symbol of rebirth. As she spoke, Jung heard a soft tapping at the window behind him. He turned, opened it, and caught the beetle, a scarabate, the closest thing to a scarab one could find in Europe. He handed it to her, saying simply, "Here is your scarab." In that instant, her intellectual armor cracked. The coincidence was too precise, too alive. The moment felt charged with what Jung called numinosity, the unmistakable energy of the sacred. It wasn't proof of magic, but a demonstration of what he meant when he said, "Meaning is the bridge between psyche and world." For Jung, this event changed everything. It showed that the unconscious was not confined to our private fantasies, it could reach into external reality. He began to see that the psyche and matter might share the same hidden roots, what he later called the unus mundus, the one world beneath all opposites. But Jung was careful. He didn't claim to have discovered a new physical law. He said synchronicity was a principle of connection, not a mechanism, a pattern of meaning that revealed the unity of psyche and cosmos. He warned, to seek the cause of synchronicity is to misunderstand its nature. It is not a chain, but a constellation. Still, he was fascinated by its implications. If meaning can organize events just as gravity organizes matter, then perhaps consciousness itself participates in the structure of the universe. To Jung, synchronicity wasn't superstition, it was a clue that the psyche and the cosmos are woven from the same mysterious fabric. Yet Jung also issued a warning. Not every coincidence is a message. He knew how easily the human mind could fall in love with its own projections, mistaking random alignments for revelation. The scarab moment was sacred because it transformed the patient, it broke through her resistance, bringing unconscious content into awareness. Without that transformation, it would have been only a curiosity. This distinction between coincidence and revelation is the soul of Jung's teaching. He said synchronicity takes the place of magic only when it leads to insight, meaning the event is not the miracle, the awakening is. So if we want to follow Jung's path, we must not stop at wonder, we must ask what the wonder is trying to awaken in us. And to do that, we first need to understand how the human mind itself creates and confuses patterns, how it can turn ordinary chance into apparent destiny. To understand how synchronicity can illuminate or deceive, we must first look at the instrument through which it's experienced, the human mind. Jung wrote, "The psyche is not only the observer of meaning, but also its creator. We do not simply discover patterns, we generate them. It's both our gift and our trap. The brain is a meaning-making machine. It evolved to find order in chaos, to detect the rustle in the grass before the tiger appears, to connect clouds with rain, to see cause behind coincidence. That's how consciousness survives uncertainty. But when that same mechanism turns inward, it doesn't just detect patterns, it invents them. Psychologists call this apophenia, seeing connections where none objectively exist. Its most familiar form is pareidolia, the impulse that makes us see faces in clouds or divine figures in tree bark. The mind is constantly trying to complete the picture, to fill in the gaps of the unknown. Jung saw this not as a flaw, but as a clue to the nature of psyche itself. He said, the psyche strives continually toward unity, even when it must invent connections to preserve the image of wholeness. In other words, our need for meaning is not optional, it's archetypal. But here lies the paradox. The same instinct that opens us to revelation can also blind us with projection. We see what we need to see, not what is. When the unconscious stirs, it doesn't speak in plain words. It projects its language, symbols, fears, longings onto the outer world. What we then encounter out there is often a reflection of what we refuse to face in here. Jung put it simply, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Think of someone haunted by guilt. They begin noticing signs of judgment everywhere, a song lyric, a random phrase, a news headline. Or someone secretly longing for love might find messages in every song, number, and passing stranger. The psyche externalizes what it cannot yet integrate, turning its inner tension into outer coincidence. This is why Jung called the world both mirror and teacher. When the unconscious is ignored, it doesn't vanish, it arranges. It arranges events, dreams, symbols, even people, to show us the pattern we've been avoiding. But until we learn discernment, we can't tell the difference between an echo of our own psyche and a whisper from the self. Our digital culture makes this confusion even easier. Algorithms are designed to reflect our desires and fears back to us, a technological projection of the very mechanism Jung described. We manifest what we click. We follow one video about a twin flame, and the algorithm floods us with hundreds more. The psyche mistakes its own reflection for revelation. Jung warned of this inflation. When the ego identifies with the voice of the self, it falls into madness. In other words, when we believe every coincidence confirms our special destiny, the ego secretly enthrones itself as divine interpreter. We no longer serve meaning, we demand it. So, how do we know when a sign is real and not a projection? How can we distinguish between an outer event carrying sacred charge and a coincidence inflated by our own need for certainty? Jung's answer wasn't simple, but it was profound. He offered not a definition, but a test, 4 ways to discern whether a synchronicity comes from the depths of the self or from the hunger of the ego. And those 4 tests will form the heart of what comes next. Jung never claimed that every coincidence was meaningful. In fact, he spent much of his life warning against that temptation. He wrote, "The greater the ignorance of the inner world, the more we project it upon the outer." For him, the true challenge was not to chase signs, but to discern which experiences carry the voice of the self and which merely echo the noise of desire. Over the years, through therapy, dreams, and his own spiritual experiments, Jung began to notice that authentic synchronicities shared certain traits. They weren't random, nor were they conjured by wishful thinking. They had a living quality, something that felt sacred, yet sober. From his writings and case studies, we can extract 4 principles, or what we might call Jung's 4 tests for true synchronicity. Test 1, the numinous charge. The first sign of true synchronicity is numinosity, a word Jung borrowed from Rudolf Otto to describe the presence of the sacred. He said, "A true symbol is numinous. It seizes and grips. When a synchronistic event occurs, it doesn't feel like ordinary excitement. It carries a stillness, a shiver of awe. The ego doesn't inflate, it quiets. Numinosity is not thrill or fantasy. It is reverence. It is as though something larger than you has entered the room and for a moment you are seen by it. In that space, the boundary between your psyche and the world becomes translucent. This is why Jung describes synchronicity as psychoid, both psychic and physical, both subjective and objective. The numinous sign humbles. It does not flatter. When the feeling is performative or addictive, I must tell everyone about my miracle, it's usually not synchronicity. As Jung noted, the numinous always unites opposites. It does not feed one side of the ego. Test 2, inner transformation. A true synchronicity transforms the observer. It doesn't just amaze, it alters. Jung wrote, synchronicity is the moment when the unconscious becomes conscious through outer event. The external coincidence becomes meaningful only when it awakens something within a recognition, a surrender, a new understanding of one's life pattern. Consider again the story of the woman and the scarab. The beetle was not magic, her awakening was. In that moment, she realized life was not a closed system of reason, that something mysterious and intelligent moved within her story. The meaning was not in the insect, but in the shift of soul it provoked. Ask yourself, did this coincidence open me, or did it simply excite me? Did it deepen humility, or inflate certainty? Jung said, the gods become real only when they change us. If you remain the same after the sign, it was likely only projection. Test 3 contextual fit. The third test is context, whether the synchronicity emerges within a process of inner work or merely appears from constant seeking. Jung observed that synchronistic events tend to cluster around moments of psychic crisis, transition, or transformation times, when the ego's control weakens and the unconscious can speak. He wrote, synchronicity is the outward expression of an inner development that has reached its fulfillment. In analysis, synchronicities often appeared when a patient was approaching a breakthrough, the moment when the inner conflict was ripe to surface. This means true signs appear organically, not on demand. They belong to a process. They are woven into the narrative of growth. When we force them through rituals of endless sign hunting or constant divination, we are no longer listening. We are manipulating. As Jung warned, magic is the will to power over mystery. So, when meaning arises naturally within a living question, it carries weight. When we chase it to soothe anxiety, it loses depth. Test 4. Repetition with depth, not quantity. Finally, Jung noted that authentic synchronicities repeat not with frequency, but with intensification of meaning. He said, the psyche speaks through symbols that return until they are understood. A false pattern multiplies endlessly, numbers, symbols, coincidences, piling up, each demanding interpretation but giving no peace. A true one returns quietly, with growing significance. It deepens rather than expands. It becomes part of your personal myth, a guiding thread that leads inward, not outward. If your signs create anxiety, urgency, or obsession, they are likely the voice of the ego trying to control uncertainty. If they bring calm, insight, humility, and coherence, they likely come from the self. Jung compared this to dreams. The ones that matter are not the loudest, but the ones that stay with you alive in silence. A genuine symbol lives and grows, he said. A counterfeit one repeats and decays. When we apply these 4 tests, numinous charge, inner transformation, contextual fit, and repetition with depth, the fog of superstition begins to clear. We start to see that the difference between spirit and self-deception isn't in the signs themselves, but in the state of consciousness that meets them. Jung wrote, synchronicity demands of us not belief but awareness. It's not about proving miracles. It's about participating in meaning consciously. And this brings us to a darker threshold. What happens when that awareness collapses? When the hunger for signs becomes addiction, and the search for meaning becomes an escape from life itself. Jung once warned, the brighter the light of meaning, the darker its shadow. That shadow appears when the hunger for meaning becomes a hunger for control. At first, synchronicity feels like grace, a whisper from the universe reminding you that your life has purpose. But soon, if the ego grows impatient, it starts to summon the signs. You stop living and start scanning. every number, every song, every cloud becomes a coded message. You refresh your feed, waiting for the universe to speak again and again until silence itself feels unbearable. This is what Jung called inflation. When the ego identifies with something larger than itself, mistaking possession for participation. He wrote, "Inflation is the most dangerous temptation of the soul, for it imitates the divine while cutting itself off from God. The modern world makes this inflation almost irresistible. Our devices echo back our thoughts, our searches, our fears, until the algorithm feels like a spirit guide. We follow number patterns, synchronicity accounts, angel message readings, end-time prophecies, AI-generated predictions, and in each we find a small thrill of cosmic intimacy. I am seen, I am chosen, I am part of the secret pattern. But the very flood of signs that once gave us comfort begins to hollow us out. Jung understood why this happens. He said the longing for certainty is the root of all superstition. When life feels unstable, when careers, relationships, and identities crumble, the psyche compensates by manufacturing control through meaning. The result is a sign addiction, a compulsive search for confirmation that the universe still holds you in its plan. At first, the signs feel luminous, but soon they multiply faster than understanding can keep up. The same number appears everywhere, at first awe-inspiring, then suffocating. Dreams seem prophetic until they contradict each other. Every coincidence becomes proof, but proof of what becomes harder to say. What began as faith transforms into anxiety. The psyche, overwhelmed by unintegrated meaning, becomes its own persecutor. Jung observed this in patients who swung between mystical elation and dread, seeing symbols of apocalypse in every passing event. He said, the gods have returned, but as symptoms. Behind this obsession lies a spiritual paradox. To interpret every event as divine guidance is not faith, it's fear disguised as devotion. Faith rests in mystery. Obsession demands answers. Faith listens. Obsession insists. The deeper danger is that obsession with signs cuts us off from the very self that synchronicity was meant to reveal. The ego hijacks the sacred, using it to inflate its identity. I have special knowledge. I see what others cannot. I am chosen by destiny. But Jung reminded us the self is not enhanced by the ego's claim. It is obscured. The tragedy is subtle. What once connected us to the mystery of life now isolates us from it. The sign that once opened the heart becomes a prison of interpretation. The divine whisper becomes the ego's echo chamber. When that happens, the remedy is not to renounce meaning, but to surrender the interpreter, to let go of the constant decoding and return to the living experience of life itself. For Jung, healing came not from suppressing signs, but from re-establishing relationship between ego and self, symbol and soul. He wrote, one must not chase the numinous, one must prepare to receive it. So if you find yourself chasing signs, remember, the more you pursue them, the more they vanish. But when you turn toward silence, when you stop hunting, meaning finds you again, unbidden, graceful, whole. And this brings us to the heart of Jung's mystery. If false synchronicity inflates the ego, true synchronicity humbles it because it is not about prediction or proof, but transformation. It is the psyche's way of speaking to itself through the world. It is the self breaking through the veil of ordinary life to awaken you to your own becoming. If false synchronicity traps us in projection, true synchronicity frees us into participation. For Jung, this was not mere philosophy, it was revelation. He believed that when synchronicity occurs, it's not the universe sending a message, but the self, the deep organizing center of the psyche, expressing itself through both inner and outer events. Jung wrote, "The self is a living reality that transcends the ego. It manifests in symbols, dreams, and events that seem arranged by a hidden intelligence." In those moments when something uncanny happens, a coincidence that pierces our defenses and feels both intimate and vast, the self is speaking through the language of life itself. Synchronicity, then, is not about predicting the future, it's about recognizing that the psyche and the world are already in dialogue. It's the point where the boundary between subject and object dissolves, where inner necessity meets outer circumstance. Jung called this the unity of the inner and outer worlds in the act of meaning. When a true synchronicity arrives, it does not flatter the ego, it calls the soul. It doesn't tell you what to do, it shows you who you are becoming. It doesn't promise safety, it demands honesty. Because at its core, synchronicity is not a cosmic signal service, it is a mirror of transformation. Jung described this as the moment the psyche finds itself reflected in the world. It's as though reality bends for just a moment to reveal your alignment with something eternal, the archetype of wholeness he called the self. He wrote, "Synchronicity is the self's act of creation, a moment when the eternal enters time." That's why true synchronicities often happen during spiritual crises, breakthroughs, or turning points. They mark thresholds when an old identity is dissolving and something deeper is ready to emerge. They arrive not to confirm the ego's plans, but to midwife the birth of a larger consciousness. Imagine you've been wrestling with grief, and one night you dream of a river carrying away a stone you've been clutching. The next day, you walk by a stream, and a smooth, pale stone catches your eye, lodged beneath the current. You feel something shift. You release the weight you didn't even know you were holding. Nothing supernatural has occurred, yet the world has become alive again. This is what Jung meant by participation mystique, the sense that life itself participates in your inner transformation. He warned, though, that the ego must never seize ownership of this mystery. The self does not belong to us, he wrote. We belong to it. The moment you say, I cause this synchronicity, or I can make it happen again, the sacred connection collapses into ego fantasy. The self cannot be controlled, only encountered. When understood correctly, synchronicity becomes a practice of listening, an art of attunement between soul and world. It's less about decoding messages than about deepening a relationship between consciousness and mystery, between psyche and cosmos. As Jung put it, the self speaks in events as it does in dreams in the language of symbol. And perhaps that's the quiet secret of this phenomenon. Synchronicity does not break the laws of nature. It reveals that meaning itself is one of those laws, invisible, a causal, yet binding us all in an unseen order. When you encounter such a moment, don't rush to label it. Let it work on you. Let it alter your sense of separation. Because what's speaking to you is not something out there, it's the deepest part of you calling from within the fabric of the world. And so the question becomes, how do we stay grounded in this dialogue? How do we work with the sacred without losing our balance in the storm of symbols? To answer that, we need practice, a way to hold meaning without grasping it, to meet synchronicity with awareness rather than obsession. Jung often said, the experience of the numinous is useless unless it is brought down to earth. He knew that an insight, no matter how divine, is incomplete until it transforms daily life. Synchronicity, for all its mystery, is not meant to leave us floating in speculation, it's meant to root us in consciousness. To live with synchronicity is to walk the narrow path between awe and sanity. Too much skepticism, and we suffocate the soul. Too much belief, and we drift into fantasy. Discernment is the middle way, a spiritual intelligence that lets meaning deepen without letting it dominate. What follows are 5 steps Jung's work implicitly teaches for grounding the experience of meaning, a psychological practice of dialogue with the self. Step 1: pause before reacting. When a coincidence stirs, you resist the instinct to interpret immediately. The ego loves to rush in. What does it mean? What is the message? But meaning cannot be forced, it unfolds. Jung compared such moments to the appearance of a wild animal. If you chase it, it flees. If you sit quietly, it may approach. So first breathe. Acknowledge the event without analysis. Let it exist as mystery, unclaimed and untamed. In that pause, the psyche begins to speak beneath the noise of the mind. Step 2: record the event. Jung kept detailed journals of his dreams, visions, and coincidences, not to catalogue miracles, but to trace the symbolic logic of his own psyche. He said, we must give the unconscious a chance to tell its story. Writing is how we listen, describe what happened, when, where, and most importantly, how it felt. Write without interpretation. Notice small details, the setting, the time, the emotion that accompanied it. Over weeks or months, patterns will begin to appear, not the obsessive kind, but the meaningful threads that repeat with deepening significance. Step 3: ask the 3 reflection questions. Once emotion has settled, Jung would invite the conscious mind to join the dialogue. He asked his patients questions that turned outer events inward. What was I thinking or feeling just before this happened? Often, the synchronicity reflects the emotional state you were avoiding. What inner conflict could this symbolize? The outer coincidence may mirror a tension between 2 opposing forces in your psyche: reason and faith, control and surrender, love and fear. What life transition am I resisting or entering? Jung believed synchronicities often cluster around thresholds, moments when the old self is dying and a new attitude is ready to be born. Through this questioning, the coincidence stops being an external event and becomes a mirror of the soul's movement. Step cat, wait for integration. Not all meaning reveals itself at once. Jung wrote, the unconscious has its own time, and it ripens like fruit. True insight arrives not when we demand it, but when we are ready to live it. Return to your journal days or weeks later. Read what you wrote. Notice what has changed in you, your feelings, dreams, or relationships. Synchronicity that comes from the self continues to unfold. It doesn't evaporate after excitement fades. Patience, in this sense, is faith in motion. Step 5: embody the meaning. The final test of truth is embodiment. A synchronicity has fulfilled its purpose only when it alters your way of being in the world. Perhaps it calls you to forgive, to create, to risk, to set a boundary, or to return to prayer. Jung said, knowledge that remains in the head is illusion. It must become blood. When you act upon insight, however small, you transform the symbol into reality. The psyche responds with renewed dialogue. Life begins to align with integrity rather than accident. Meaning that is grounded becomes wisdom. Practicing discernment in this way turns synchronicity from spectacle into relationship. It keeps you rooted in both mystery and reality, aware that every event might carry significance, yet not enslaved by the need to extract it. As Jung wrote near the end of his life, the task is not to believe in miracles, but to live as if life itself were one. And when you begin to live this way, not chasing signs, but conversing with life as symbol, you start to see that meaning itself evolves. It grows from the personal into the collective, from the private heart into the myth of humanity. That is where the experience of synchronicity touches something vast, not only our individual stories, but the archetypes shaping our age. And in our time, no archetype is more powerful or more misunderstood than the one now flooding our culture again, the rapture. Every age has its signature dream, a collective image that reveals what humanity most fears and most hopes for. For ours, that dream is the rapture. Scroll through social media today and you'll see its modern forms everywhere. Prophetic warnings, cosmic alignments, countdowns to apocalypse. Beneath the language of theology, something psychological is stirring a mass, longing for escape, for transcendence, for a sign that all this chaos has a purpose. Jung would have recognized this immediately. He once wrote, "When the gods are denied their temples, they return in visions and fears." What we call rapture fever is not just religious excitement, it's an eruption of the archetype of transformation projected outward into history. Jung observed that when the collective psyche reaches a breaking point, it externalizes its need for renewal as a cosmic drama. The end of the world becomes a symbol for the end of an era within the human soul. He said, "What is to come looks like the end, but it is the beginning." The apocalypse, psychologically speaking, is not destruction, it's revelation. It is the unveiling apocalypsis of what has been unconscious. In this sense, the rapture isn't merely about being taken up, it's about being woken up. It is the ancient pattern of ego, death, and rebirth written in the language of heaven. It represents the soul's longing to be lifted out of fragmentation, to be reunited with wholeness, what Jung called the self, the imago Dei within. But when this inner archetype is misunderstood, it becomes dangerous. When we literalize it, we start searching the skies instead of the psyche. We wait for the end of the world instead of the transformation of our world within. Jung warned, the more we externalize the symbols of renewal, the less we experience their true effect. That's what's happening now, a collective projection of spiritual hunger. The flood of prophetic coincidences, number patterns, disasters predicted in dreams, messages decoded from the news reveals not divine punishment but a deep psychic compensation. The modern soul, disoriented by materialism and disconnection, has begun to call its own shadow the apocalypse. Yet, even in this confusion, there is grace. Synchronicity reminds us that meaning has not died, it's simply misread. The archetype of the rapture shows that something within humanity still yearns to be united with the divine. Jung wrote, "The longing for God is the longing for the wholeness of the self." When we feel the tremors of destiny in the world around us, we are sensing the soul's cry for integration. So perhaps the true rapture is not disappearance, but participation. The moment we awaken to the fact that the divine is not ending the world, but entering it. Through every synchronistic moment, life whispers, you are already being gathered not away from the earth, but into awareness. To live in that awareness is to experience the world as sacred again, to see every ordinary event as a doorway to transcendence. And from that sacred awareness, a new form of faith can emerge, not based on fear of the end, but on conscious participation in the unfolding of meaning. To live in an age of signs is both a blessing and a trial. The world is charged with meaning, but meaning without discernment easily becomes hysteria. Jung understood this tension intimately. He wrote, "Where belief is too weak, the soul withers. Where it is too strong, reason burns." Between those two extremes lies what he called the middle way of consciousness, a faith that neither clings nor rejects, but participates. A faith that sees the world as alive with symbols, yet does not mistake symbols for facts. A mature faith in meaning begins with humility. It accepts that mystery exists, but that it must never be forced into certainty. It walks hand in hand with doubt, not the doubt of cynicism, but the doubt that protects reverence. Jung said, the closer we come to the truth, the more we are wrapped in paradox. In other words, to truly approach the sacred, one must be willing to live with unanswered questions. Faith without discernment becomes fanaticism. Skepticism without wonder becomes despair. And it is between those poles, belief and doubt, that consciousness evolves. Jung believed that meaning itself is not static but relational. He wrote, the meeting of two worlds, inner and outer, human and divine, takes place in the awareness of man. That awareness is what transforms superstition into insight. To hold meaning consciously is to neither worship the sign nor dismiss it. It is to say this moment is alive with possibility, but its truth will reveal itself only through time. It is to recognize that synchronicity is not there to make life predictable, it's there to make life present. Jung saw this as the next evolution of religious consciousness, a movement from external faith to inner participation. In traditional religion, the divine speaks through revelation. In modern psychology, it speaks through the psyche. But in the future, Jung envisioned a synthesis, a spirituality of awareness, where revelation and psyche meet. He called this the birth of a new God image in man. This new faith does not need omens to feel guided, nor miracles to feel blessed. It sees every relationship, every loss, every coincidence as part of the ongoing dialogue between self and world. It knows that meaning is not delivered from above, it arises between, as Jung said, meaning makes a great many things endurable, perhaps everything. To live this way is to trust that consciousness itself is sacred, that awareness, not escape, is our redemption. The rapture, then, is not an event on the horizon, but a condition of the soul. It is what happens each time awareness lifts us out of mechanical existence into living participation with the mystery of being. So when the next coincidence appears, when the world seems to wink at you through the smallest detailed pause, not to decode it, not to worship it, but to recognize that you are part of its meaning. You are not a spectator of science, but a co-creator of significance. The universe is not testing you, it is conversing with you. This is faith after superstition, wonder after fear. A faith mature enough to hold paradox, to listen, and to let the unknown remain alive. Jung once wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And perhaps synchronicity, with all its mystery, wonder, and confusion, is one of the ways life invites us into that becoming. If you've ever stood in awe before a coincidence too precise to explain, you felt what Jung called the touch of the self. It's not the world manipulating your fate, it's the deeper intelligence of your own being breaking through the veil of chance. In that instant, time seems to fold. The ordinary becomes luminous. You remember, if only for a heartbeat, that you are part of a greater pattern, not separate from it. Jung believed that such moments are not interruptions of reality, but revelations of it. He said, the world is not merely as it appears, it is full of invisible correspondences. To experience those correspondences consciously is to live as if the universe were alive, as if meaning were not something we invent, but something we encounter. Yet, he also warned, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Which means that our search for meaning must stay grounded, anchored in humility, in shadow, in the slow work of becoming human. Because if synchronicity shows us that the divine participates in our lives, it also reminds us that we must participate in the divine through awareness, compassion, and courage. So, take a moment now, think of one coincidence that changed you. Maybe it was small, A phrase overheard at the exact right moment? A stranger's kindness? A dream that mirrored your waking life? Ask yourself, what did it awaken in me? What truth did it reveal about who I am becoming? Because every true sign, no matter how fleeting, points not toward prediction but toward presence. Synchronicity isn't about escaping reality. It's about realizing that reality itself is alive with consciousness. It's the self reminding you that even the smallest event can carry infinite significance when seen with an open heart. It's the invitation to live symbolically, to let ordinary life shimmer with hidden dialogue. And maybe that's what faith truly means now, not waiting for the end of the world, but waking to the sacredness of the one we already inhabit. Between coincidence and calling lies consciousness, the thin, luminous thread connecting psyche and cosmos. That's where meaning begins. That's where you begin. So the next time the world sends you a whisper, a song, a number, a sign, don't rush to decode it. Just notice it. Let it remind you that the universe isn't speaking to you, it's speaking with you. And in that quiet dialogue between you and the mystery, something ancient continues to unfold. The realization that life itself is the synchronistic event, the eternal meeting of meaning and matter.